Well, hey everybody, thanks for joining our live interactive product showcase on CMiC owner Billings. This is Chet Cookett, the product manager for Project Controls. So Project Controls, as most of you probably know by now, really involves everything to do with job costing, so budgeting and forecasting, billings, of course, which we'll cover today, change management, subcontract management, and PCIs and things of that nature. And what is CMiC owner billing? So the job billing module is a fully integrated billing application that automatically produces time and material invoices, as well as an AIA style invoices. And traditionally we've called the owner billings, or excuse me, the billing module owner billings, but really this involves, or this applies to anybody that's doing billing to some sort of customer. So if I'm a specialty, right, I'm not necessarily billing the owner of the project, I'm billing the general contractor. And for, of course, for our general contractors, you're going to be billing your customer, the owner of the project. And for today's presentation for the interactive workshop, we're going to cover three main topics here, and we're going to have a point for Q&A, an interactive Q&A at the end of the each of the three sections. So we're going to follow, or excuse me, we're going to tackle creating the billing schedule of values, so effectively creating our bill codes and how we go from a cost and billing budget or revenue budget, creating that billing contract schedule of values. We're going to talk about PCI detail billing. So that's going to be the ability to see PCIs on our actual invoice, and I'll be using an AIA style invoice today. And then the last topic we'll cover is going to be the billing backup with image links. And that's your ability to produce a report that will have the actual copies, the invoices from either the subcontractor if you're a GC, or the material supplier if you're a specialty contractor. And so giving the customer of the project, the one you're billing, giving them hard copy of the actual original invoice that you're billing them for. And we'll go through the setup of that. Okay, so for our first topic, I'm just going to kind of give us the kind of main points that we're going to talk about today, and then we'll get right into the demonstration. So we're going to be covering, bid items or the enter budget screen. Which screen should I be using to create or to start creating my contract and my contract details. We're going to put some emphasis on the mappings from JC program, so the mappings from job cost program that effectively is going to take our cost codes, our billing budget, our revenue budget, and create those bill codes for us. And then we'll talk about the different billing types like costs, percent complete, unit billing as just kind of a mention, and you'll see me post some transactions and see how those flow into the actual invoice when we produce one. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the actual demonstration. Just give me 1 second to switch the screens around, go off webcam so everybody can focus, and we'll get right into the product. Make sure I didn't accidentally stop sharing my screen. Nope, that looks all good. Okay. Alrighty, and let me just move this GoToMeeting little widget I have in the top right-hand corner. Everything's looking good. Excellent. Okay, so what I'm going to be covering now is actually creating our contract, more specifically the billing codes. And depending on your screen, depending on your configuration, kind of depending on who's listening to this presentation, we might have end users and admin. Your bill codes that I'm calling might be called something a little bit different in your system. In mine, it's called the pay app codes. And effectively what these is the line items that we see on the actual billing invoice, with a few exceptions. I might have some non-recoverables and things like that. But for the most part, these are the line items that correlate to my cost or work breakdown structure. And these are the line items I'm going to be using to actually produce that billing amount. And there's a couple different ways, as I mentioned in that kind of 3 bullet points there, of how we may come to creating these bill codes. The first one I'm going to talk about is going to be a pretty traditional way, and that's staying within the enterprise module here. Enterprise, some folks might have this called professional, depending on your user access, your security privileges. And so where we're going to start is we're going to get into the assign cost code section. And I'm going to go ahead and queue up my job here. Excellent. So probably one of the most traditional and popular ways of getting to both my budget and then for today's topic, the actual billing contract, is by working through the assigned job cost codes or assigned cost codes to the job screen, moving into the enter budget screen, and then producing those contract details. Sorry, if I the pause, if you're wondering what's happening, it's just me moving the go-to window panel. You can shrink it, but sometimes it kind of just populates its way. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the actual assigned cost code section here. I'm just going to use a couple examples, and then we're going to get right into the enter budget and then create our contract details. So in this example here, I've already created my job, right? Hopefully most of us are pretty familiar with creating a job in CMiC, and if not, we've got lots of good material on that. And right now I've already got the cost codes assigned, but to kind of show us this in action, I'm going to go ahead and grab a template, a cost code template here, and scroll through my list, find the one I'm looking for, and I'm going to go ahead and populate my cost codes. As a little bonus tip, if you're using multiple templates, so for instance, if I wanted to use this template that has a series of standard codes, maybe for things like, in this example, payroll, or maybe I have another template that's all for my general condition cost codes. Oh, a little bit of feedback there. When I pull a new template in, so I've already applied one template, now I'm going to apply another one, the cost codes from that first template aren't removed, okay? We're simply just adding on top of our already existing cost codes. So go ahead and populate those. Excellent. And so now I've got a whole bunch of cost codes assigned to this particular job. And of course, this is going to be really important as we make our way into the enter budget and then to create our contract details. And so some things I might want to double check before I'm going further, and again, depending on your control setup, are which categories do I have assigned to these particular cost codes? A lot of times folks would have this defaulted from the master setup, right? So you've already assigned the categories to, in this case, my general conditions cost code. And here I'm just going to go ahead and grab my labor code, for instance, go ahead there and add that, and then maybe also grab some material as well and go ahead and add that category too. Okay, excellent. Let me just attach that. Save my screen. And now I'm ready to move into the next stage, which is creating the budget. Go ahead, queue up our job. Excellent. And you can see, sorry, just move that out of the way. That I've got a whole bunch of cost codes now assigned, and a bunch of them don't have any sort of value to them. So depending on what I'm doing next, I may want to import the actual budget, right? And so that'll populate the values for me using the import feature. Or depending on the size of the job, I might go ahead and just start manually typing in my budgeted amounts. So let me go in here and just again, as an example, right? I'm just going through and filling in the different amounts here. 45,000, 55,000, so on and so forth. And then of course I just keep working my way through. Now I took the liberty early on, so you didn't have to watch me do a lot of this. Oops. Sorry, I took the liberty to earlier going ahead and actually just putting in some values already, right? And so now I've got my budget cost amount and my budget revenue amount as well, both in the same screen. I've got my cost code and I've got my category. And so effectively at this point, I'm ready to create my contract details. And from this screen here, from the enter budget screen, I can go ahead and just click create contract. And what the system is going to do is it's going to go ahead and create all of my bill codes for me. Now there's an important piece, really important piece when it comes to creating those contract details automatically. And I'll mention some processes where you might do this manual. I'm just going to show us something now on the job setup, which is what is the mapping code or mapping rules, if you will, that's going to take all of my cost codes and effectively create these bill codes. And then now there's a relationship between the cost code and category and my bill codes. And in this case here, I'm using the JB map code GC PCI. And again, this is just one that I've created that's got some configuration involved in it. And this again is really important because this is how our bill codes are getting created. It's looking at what the mapping rule is. Based off this mapping rule, it's going to go ahead and create those bill codes for me. And so let's go ahead and take a look at the mappings from JC program. So you're free when creating these mapping rules is really to create as many as you'd like. And you might have different mapping rules depending on the different types of jobs that you have, right? You'll have different mapping codes if you're a general contractor and you have some self-performing jobs. It's going to probably be a little bit different versus, say, a specialty contractor, right, who'd have a different mapping rule. And effectively, if we're wondering, okay, what is the end result here, is how are we displaying the invoice or the contract line items to our customer/owner? What are they going to see when I produce that invoice, whether it's a free-form invoice, right, so a non-AIA style invoice, or what are they going to see on that AIA style invoice? Think of that G702, G703, specifically the G703, all of those different line items. The most common mapping code for just about all of our customers, kind of regardless if you're a specialty or a general contractor, and I'm using those two terms, but of course there's different types, right? We have architect and consultants and different types of construction companies all using CMiC. I'm just kind of keeping it pretty simple for now. And so what you're seeing here in the map code 1-to-1, again, this being the most common, and what's common about it is using the lowest level cost code and the lowest level category. And so what does lowest level cost code mean? Well, that means is if we think of about our cost code structure, and I'll use concrete as an example, you'll often have O3 just representing concrete, but you don't charge any time, costs, or materials to that O3 cost code. You'll usually do it to a code like O3110 or some sort of very specific numeric code that we're going to capture the cost. And effectively, in that example where I have O3 and then O3110, that cost code O3110 is the lowest cost code. And if you're new to CMiC, or maybe you're not using the enterprise side of our system, so essentially the kind of accounting side of it and the job costing side, might not be familiar with this. You might just be using field, and so this is new to you. And so remember, when we're tracking and capturing costs, we're always doing it against the lowest level. So in my example where I have O3 as the controlling code, I have O3110 as the lowest code. If I were to add another level to this, like O3110.001, well then the .001 becomes my lowest level cost code. And this, having it at the lowest level, again, is really important because it's going to avoid any errors and issues that you'll likely run into later on in the system. You might see error messages like you need to have one-to-one mapping. Those using contract forecasting might have seen that error before. And then the same principle is applied for the category side of things. So my lowest level category. Another example might be labor is my controlling category. I don't ever charge time to that particular category, but I have other categories underneath that, L1, L2, L3, to mark the different types of labor, professional labor, like back office folks, and maybe my PMs versus my trades labor, might be like an L2, something to that effect. And then what I have, once I've mapped out my bill codes, is how do I want to populate my different group codes? And so again, depending on how your customer/owner likes to see the invoice, it's going to really dictate what you populate in these group codes. Group codes are really the grouping, as the name implies, of all of these different line items that we have in our invoice. What do you want to see? How do you want these different bill codes broken out on the invoice? And that'll become clear once we actually get to the invoice side. So effectively what I'm having here is I'm going to have a single code, a single bill code that is going to be both my cost code, the lowest level, and then my category. So it'll look like something like cost code dot category. And we'll see that in our next screen when we get to the enter contract. I mentioned before that I was using a different one, and I'm using this one called GC-PCI-1. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this later, but just to kind of point something out, because I'm going to use the same job for the different portions of the demonstration, is I have that same lowest level cost code, lowest level category, but I also have the WBS code as well. I'll talk more about WBS codes in a little bit, but effectively this is my one-to-one mapping code like the one you saw before, except I've added another additional code for WBS, and that really comes into effect when I get to the PCI section. Alrighty, so we have uploaded our cost codes, right? We've assigned our categories, got our budgets, we verified our mapping code was good to go, and now right from the enter budget screen, I can go ahead and click create contract. And that's now going to go ahead and create my bill codes and populate all of the defaults that I would have had set up in the control file for the under the job billing control file. And for most of us, we're probably familiar with the control file. That's all the rules and behavior of a particular module. And so every time I create a new contract, right, I have all of these defaults. I have all these flags essentially enabled for me automatically, and that introduces a whole bunch of standardizations for us. So we've got our contract details created, and now let's go ahead and jump into that contract. We'll go ahead and just pull up that job. There it is there. Okay, excellent. So now I've got my contract created. And again, I'm not going to go through the different tabs that we're seeing up here at the top. Really important stuff, but I'm sure many of you probably know by now that billing is sometimes several weeks of training and not something we can easily cover in just an hour. And so now I've got those bill codes or pay app codes in this case created. Let me just pop this up so we can see it a little bit better. Okay, excellent. And what I wanted us to see here is notice now this bill code, right? And what did I say? It's the lowest level cost code, lowest level category. And that's what I'm seeing in this first part of the string. There's my cost code. And then the second piece is the category. Now this underscore versus like a period, perhaps, kind of how this bill code actually looks like, what that separator is controlled in that mapping rule. So you're able to decide how much of the cost code you want to appear in the bill code, what's the separator between the category, and same with when we get into the PCI side, how do I want to effectively show the bill code that represents that PCI for me, okay? And before I go any further, I'm going to kind of just put a pause right there, and I'm just going to jump over into the project management side of things and just briefly mention bid items. And I won't spend too much time on here, but I'll definitely just introduce it. When working with several customers, I know some of them don't use this bid item program, right? Just not something that they've had time to effectively implement just yet. And what I'm showing everybody here, let me just make this a little bit bigger. You can think of this as really, get some values there. We can think of this effectively as the enter budget screen that we saw in the enterprise world, in the financial screens I was just in, right? I've got a job, a cost code, a cost type, I've got an estimated amount, and in some cases I'll have a revenue amount associated to these lines as well. And from this screen, I can import my budget directly, meaning I can skip the step where I assign cost codes to the job first, then I define a budget value, then I create my contract. In the bid item screen, I can do a direct import from Excel. We provide you with the different with the template, and I would just go ahead, browse that file. I'm not going to do it now. Browse for the file, do an import. The system will validate that the cost codes I'm using are in fact in the master list. And I have the permission to do basically this import. And so I'm kind of effectively skipping a step, the assign cost codes, but depending on your standards, depending on kind of best practices at your company, you may decide to turn this on, or you might have hidden this from your users altogether, because again, there's a lot more flexibility in the bid item screen because it's effectively combining 3 screens, if you will, or 2 screens, if you will, into one, I can have a lot of different columns exposed here. So sometimes it just comes down to preference. And I said before that I can create my contract details from the bid item screen. And to do so, once I've imported everything, I've defined my estimate, I've defined my contract values, I'm going to go ahead and click this button up here at the top that says Update Budget. And even though it says Update Budget, we can create those contract details. These options you're seeing within the bid item screen are basically configuration options. What do I want to do to this job structure? Am I adding new cost codes and effectively bill codes? Am I replacing the entire structure, right? Kind of depending on, maybe I started in a development phase and I only had like business development cost codes on my particular job. I'm going to go ahead and maybe use the add new rows only. I'm not going to remove any of the existing structure there. I still want it there. And so all I want to do is add some new build codes. The other options I have here, again, is what to do with the budget amount if it's null. And which of the pricing sets am I looking at, the cost budget and the revenue budget, right? Because remember, we have both a cost budget and a billing budget as well for each of our cost code categories or each of our line items within our work breakdown structure. Once I'm happy with everything, once I've kind of gone ahead and checked everything off, I'm going to go ahead, click this button that says Update Contract, decide via this dropdown, what am I doing next? Now, in this example, I've already created the contract, so I probably only want to use the add new build codes only. Reset all grooves, reset all build code budgets. That's effectively kind of wiping out what was there before and saying, okay, this new structure that I've defined in the bid items, that's my structure going forward. Ignore effectively what I had before. And so what we've kind of briefly covered there is you have, when setting up our contract, you have three methods. The first being using the assign cost codes to enter budget to create contract details. I can use the bid item program to import directly cost code category, cost and billing budget, create contract details. And then the last option is just to do this manually. Now, depending on the type of jobs you have, if these are like high turnaround, these are really quick jobs, it might be easier for some folks to just come in, insert a line item, and start typing away. So I lost my line item there. And just effectively manually typing in my bill code, my budgeted billing amount, and then proceeding accordingly. Now that we've defined our actual, contract details, the contract schedule values. Oh, there's my manual line, sorry. Let me go ahead and grab one here. You know what, let's avoid this. Sorry, so now that I have my billing schedule values defined, I want to pay particular attention to the type that I'm seeing here. And what this type means is, you could think of this as like the billing type, or some people will call this almost like the contract method, but that might not be specific enough, is how am I generating a billing amount from the cost that's posted against these bill codes. The most common ones are going to be your cost type. And the cost type represents any time I have posted cost against that cost code and category. And remember, my bill code is just a combination of cost code category. In my example, yours might be different. And anytime I have posted cost, I want that to apply a markup to the cost, 2%. It might be a rate, or it might be a multiplier. Again, depending on the type of cost code and the type of markup I need to achieve. The other ones, if you look here in my list, I've got several different types of milestone billing. I have non-recoverable, which is used quite often. So again, that's a line item I want to see on my contract, but I don't want the cost to flow through. So a lot of specialties will often have non-recoverable types on their contracts because the cost that they're recording isn't flowing into the billing. It's more of kind of like a lump sum style where I'm just typing in the amount, right? Cost isn't driving my my billing amount. The other common billing type is percent complete, or percent of cost, I should say. And what this does for me is effectively when I post cost against that particular code, the system is going to calculate for me what the percent complete of that is, right? So if it's like a $100,000 budget for that cost code, I've posted $10,000, okay, it's 10%, and it's going to apply that 10% to the billing budget. So if the billing budget is 100,000, it'll just generate another 10,000 for me. If my billing budget is higher, like something like 120,000, then it's going to generate the 12,000 for me. And so again, the system is automatically producing a billing amount for us depending on what we've defined here in the type. And just as a quick example here, let's go ahead and post some costs and see how those flow through into the billing side. So I'm just going to quickly jump into my JC transactions. Oh, what's going on? There we go. Just the old double click. Okay, so again, I'm doing a very generic, job cost transaction here. It's not coming from, like AP, for instance. It's not coming from the request for payments. And I'm just going to go ahead and plug in my job. Oops. Got the first part of it. Grab my cost good in this case. And let me just check which ones I had 4% complete. 03, 1133. There we go. Okay, grab my category. Let's use materials. And I can put in the quantity rate if I need to, but I'm just going to go ahead and throw in a debit of, let's say, 4,320. And we'll do 2 more lines real quick. And this time I want 030. Oops. And 1141. There we go. Okay, get my subcontracts in, and I'm going to put in, let's say, 5,200, and then we'll just balance this out with our G line. And 9,520. There we go, that looks good. Let me jump over into the post transactions. Everything looks good there, and I'm going to go ahead and click post. Again, I'm not going to cover any of this kind of posting topic. And so what's important is once I've done that, and now I'm ready to get into the actual billing side, I just need to make sure that I effectively recalculate the billing. So I bring in those costs. Again, depending on where I am in the process, sometimes I don't need to do all of the steps I'm about to mention. Sometimes you certainly would. Okay. Very good. Now I'm going to come in here and it says unprepared transactions. Effectively, that just means I have transactions that are waiting to be included and I need to kind of pay particular attention to them. Let me go ahead and recalc my billings. And most folks would check off the include new transactions, get rid of this date, in this case anyways, unless I want it to be specific to a particular reference date or to the posting date. So I only want to bring in certain costs. Again, lots of control on how the costs will flow in. And now what I've done is I click that cost transaction pop-up. That shows us all of our different posted costs here. And if we kind of scrub through, here's one of our transactions there, the 5,200. Right, that looks pretty good. And I've also got this other one for materials as well that you've seen me post. I think that's the one I was looking for, was it? There it is. And so we'll notice that the calculated potential revenue in this case is much higher because this one is generating my billing amount based off the percent complete, whereas my S line, my S category line down here was just a cost pass through. And again, I might have like different rates set up and different multipliers based off my billing rate setup. And so again, I'm just showing you that we can have different billing methods or different billing types on that same contract. And a lot of times folks would have, let's say cost kind of all the way through. All of their bill codes are just cost. And then maybe for a few particular line items, they're going to have some different methods as opposed to a whole big contract with lots of different mix and match. So let me just double check my notes here. Okay, that's good. We posted it. And everything looks pretty good. And now we're ready to go ahead and actually produce our bill. So I'll go ahead and now print this. Regenerate and print. And I'll click OK. And run that report. Okay, excellent. And so now I've got my G702, I've got my G703 here. Let me zoom in. And if we remember, here is my, oh, down here, sorry, almost missed it, right? Here is my this period calculated revenue amount. Now I have had some additional costs get pulled through as well, and that's why we're seeing a little bit higher. But if we look down here, there's the line item that you saw me enter, oops, for that 5,200. Right? So from going from the assign cost codes or the bid item screen, create your contract details based off the mapping rule that you've used. Most likely it's going to be lowest level cost code, lowest level category. That creates your build codes so that as soon as I have cost posted, the system knows what contract line is mapped to which cost code category combination. It applies any necessary markups for me. And now I've gone ahead and produced the bill, and all that's left for me to do is actually go ahead and post this invoice and effectively create that open receivable for this particular draw. Let me just jump now back in my little slide deck here. And so that's it for setting up our schedule of values. These next portions I think will go a lot quicker so that we have lots of time for some questions. And so what I'm going to talk about next is PCI detail billing. And effectively what you're seeing here, and this is a little kind of snippet from the report, is I'm able to now see the PCI as a separate line item on the invoice, whereas if I didn't have this, my PCI/change order would be lumped into probably the pay application from the subcontractor as just a single line item. Or in some cases, it might just look like a cost item, depending again how I've set it up. Cost item meaning the sub has submitted a request for payment right against that PCI amount or that subcontract change order, I should say. And then that would just flow its way into the invoice. And depending on which cost code and category and bill code I use would determine whether it's separate or whether it's lumped up. And what do I need to do to get this set up is I need to use WBS codes I'll talk about in just a second. I need to enable PCI billing in the control or directly onto the contract. Again, depending on what the company setup is, I need to verify my invoice format has decided to basically show the bill code separately. And then I need to add the new bill codes once I've posted that PCI to my contract. And again, depending on configuration, that bill code might be flowing in automatically, or I might be just manually adding it, depending on how much user control we want to have. So I did a brief mention about WBS when I showed you my mapping code earlier, if you remember. And what WBS codes are effectively an extra attribute that you can add to your cost code category combination to give you more granular information for both job cost, right? I want to capture costs at a very specific area or something very unique about it. I want to associate attributes to it. And effectively why I'm doing that is, yes, I've got good kind of granular cost control and kind of granular cost capturing, but effectively why I'm doing this is for reporting. It makes my life really easy to now slice the data and see where we're tracking costs against, in some cases, the PCI, against maybe a equipment code in this case, or maybe an area. So you might use floors, different rooms of a building, interior, exterior, lots of different ways the customers have used these WBS codes to effectively have an extra attribute for cost capture and cost reporting. And so what I have here in my WBS codes, I have this set up for PCI. Okay, now for those that might be familiar with WBS kind of as a general whole, just as a kind of FYI, PCI WBS codes behave differently than the rest of our WBS codes. There's some hard-coded business logic behind when I select the PCI, which makes what we're about to see all come together. And so what I've done here is I said, okay, my WBS code number 2, WBS2, it's the second line, is going to be PCI. If I were to go into the value section, and oops, what am I doing here? Actually, we'll skip this piece. I was going to show the actual codes and the values, but effectively is a lot of times people will set up values for different WBS codes. Like you saw area before, I might say, what's the valid data that's associated with area, floors, rooms, that sort of thing. But with PCI, you're not associating any value to the code. It's all going to happen for us automatically. And then as a reminder, let me jump back in that mapping section. go to my mapping code, right? Remember, this is assigned to the job, this mapping code GC PCI. And for my third source, so the third source or the kind of third value to create my build code is going to be WBS2. Notice it just says WBS2, it doesn't say PCI, and that's how it works. And what's going to happen is when I post, when I post this PCI, the system is going to create a build code for me automatically with the lowest level cost code, the lowest level category, which would be from the PCI directly, because you're always tracking costs against the lowest level. Plus, it's going to add my PCI number for me as well, and I can determine what that length is as well. So basically, if I had really long PCI numbers and maybe the first, the last couple of digits wasn't really unique or something like that, I might have it terminate or basically end after 10 characters. So again, we've got cost code, category, and then PCI code is what's going to generate our build codes for us. And in the report I had up earlier, and again, we'll go through this so that you can see, is notice when I scroll down here to this section, and where I have it highlighted, maybe I'll zoom in a little bit more. This is an example of after I've done the appropriate setup, I've posted the PCI, I've flown it into the billing, and I'm actually producing it. I can see in this case the cost code, the category, so the S, and then I can see my PCI code as well. So my build code in this case, again, is cost code, category, and PCI code. So the first thing we have to make sure is our WBS, one of our WBS, one of 4, is set to PCI. The next thing we got to make sure is that our build code from build code mappings has WBS2 as part of it. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And now I just need to check a couple other items, one being the invoice format. So let's jump over in that. And I'm looking for number 5. And what I wanted you to see here is the show build code level on billing invoices. So this flag on the invoice format is what makes seeing the PCI as a build code possible. Because if I don't have that flag checked, I'm just going to see the cost code, or depending on like my group codes perhaps, again depending on my setup, but I'm not going to see it broken out into this detail unless I have this flag checked. Okay, so the next thing that we need to have done is, now that we have our build code flag checked, is ready to jump over to the field side or the enterprise side, actually, it doesn't matter, and create this PCI. So let's go ahead and get into the right project. There we go. Go to my potential change item, and I'm going to go ahead and create this one pretty quickly. So let's go ahead to external change. I'm going to go ahead and just say this is approved. Okay, very good. And now let me go ahead, oops, ignore my description here. Nobody wants to see me type. Okay, and now I'm ready to get my schedule of values, or the actual PCI details in here. So let's go ahead and put in our vendor. Oops. Notice again, everything's populating for me automatically. That looks all good. Cost type, I'm gonna leave build code alone. That's important for this scenario here. I'm gonna leave this build code alone. And I'm gonna go ahead and plug in my final amount. Let's see, 22,000. That looks good. I'll go ahead and save this. Okay, excellent. And notice again, build code is still blank. Now I'm ready to post this. And you might have workflows in place that'll control whether or not someone can post. I'm gonna go ahead and click proceed. Beautiful and excellent. Look what we have here. So notice the build code now is the cost code, right? 03110, my cost type, so that S right next to the underscore, there's my cost type. And then the last part is the EXT-003, which corresponds to my PCI code that's up here at the top. everything's looking pretty good so far. And again, all based off my mapping. Now, one thing that's really important that I skipped over is when I get to the contract, there we go. So one of the really important things that I went over a little too quickly, just because I'm keeping track of the time and we need to wrap things up pretty quickly, is I need to have this detailed PCI billing flag checked as well. So I have it checked here on the contract. That might come from the control file setup, which would be under setup, local tables control, so that every contract has this flag. Or if it's only kind of one-offs, I might just be coming to the contract directly and flagging this as detailed PCI billing. Okay. So then we need this flag checked off. We need to have the WBS set up for PCIs. We need to have our invoice format with the flag checked off. And once we have all of that, now we can get into our billing side. Pull up that contract. Okay, excellent. Let me just recalc my billings. And this is just a good habit to train our users to kind of always just be recalcing so that we kind of guarantee that costs are going to flow into our billing side for us. Looking pretty good. And let me go ahead and there we go. So based off the setup, I might have these flow in automatically, or I might be doing what I'm doing, which is clicking the add build code. So remember, there's that build code, right? That's the PCI that we just created. Let me go ahead and select that. Click accept. Okay, excellent. And I just like to save. Let's go look at the details now. And I think I see it right there. Excellent. And so there's now that PCI that I just created. And depending on the different rules, right, I'm going to have that billing amount get generated for me either automatically, or in this case, I'm going to go ahead and just type an amount. So let's go ahead and just say, how much was that PCI for? Did I get rid of the screen? Oops, I must have. Let's just put it as 2,500. Keep it simple. We'll save it. Going to recalc again, because remember, any changes I do to my billing, I need to recalculate. Excellent, and now I'm ready to go ahead and print that invoice. Oops, I forgot to hit generate, but it did it for me automatically there. Run the report. And if we scroll down, there's our EXT, there's our change order there, right? As a separate bill code, we've got our 2,500 that we're looking to bill. And you'll notice up here in my G702, where I normally see those change orders, I'm not seeing anything there. And that's just based off the different controls. So just like with cost transactions, where I get this pop-up and I can control which costs effectively are being in the bill, like I can override things that would automatically be there, I can come into these changes that I've created and flip on the flag. And so if I do this, if I turn this flag on, if I save it, I would now see that PCI would show up for me in that G702 section. Okay. Alrighty, so that's our detailed PCI billing. And now for our last module, before we get into the questions, oops, I forgot to go to the demo slide, is our billing backup with image links. And effectively what we're doing here is we're going to create an image album. And so for those that might not be using Image Manager, an image album, think of it as a folder like you'd have in your Windows Explorer, like like your desktop. It'd be a folder where you're putting all of your sub-pay applications, your miscellaneous invoices, maybe different timesheet images as an example. So basically buckets where all of these images go and the corresponding data that goes along with that invoice. And the most common would be like a request for payment. So I create an image album. I want to make sure if I'm using the request for payment in project management, there's a control file flag I need to have set called copy PM RFP to imaging, and that'll take that attachment from the RFP, put that into imaging. So when I produce this billing backup, I'm going to have those image links there for me. And then I'll show us actually producing one of these here. So let me just get into an example real quick. There we go. And so what a job billing backup with image links is a report that often goes along with that AIA style invoice that will provide extra level of detail for your customer, whether it's the owner or a general contractor, with the actual original invoice from the material supplier, from the request for payment, the sub for the request for payment. And what you'll notice here is those line item transactions have this image link next to it. And when I click on that, that'll show me the actual PDF of that invoice that was submitted, right? If I click image link, here's the actual invoice that was submitted by the sub. And now when the owner is going through, they can verify and have that extra level of granularity, and in some cases, just good record keeping. Okay, so let's get into it. So what I often would do first, if I was starting from scratch, is I'd go ahead and I'd create different album types. So effectively these buckets, these folders, and those folders correspond to Image Manager. In the interest of time, because it looks like I'm talking a little slower than I expected, is I'm going to show us from the report section. So where to access the billing backup with image links is, well, here, billing backup with image links. So I have an album type, and think of the album type again as almost, in this case, is like basically rules, right? So first we have the actual folders themselves. Where do our attachments go? Then we have an album type. And what this type does is it has a bunch of rules that says which images do I want to have pulled into this backup? Because you probably don't want everything. You want a lot of stuff. You want a lot of hard copies, but not everything. So what I would do is I would define my album type that has a series of different rules. And I'd give this a target folder name. So what's the folder when this prints on my computer? Where's this going to go? And I'm just going to call everything 1940. Oh, you know what? Let's go draw one. Okay, draw one. And my contract is 1940. Draw number one. There's 0 revisions to it. And so the next really important piece is defining the image search. So what you're doing is you're telling the system which images do I want to have pulled into this backup, basically like a big selection criteria. And we have workshops and training material that'll go into this in a lot of detail, and not something we were planning on showing too much about on this call for today, but really just to kind of point out how this all comes together. So this first section here, what am I looking for? I'm looking for basically job billing images. I have a job billing search. And the search is going to say, okay, I want the system to look into these different document types. So I mentioned before, like you'd create these different buckets in Image Manager. These are those different buckets. Miscellaneous invoice, look inside the pay application bucket, the registered pay request bucket. And in some cases, you might not want it looking in all of these different folders into these different buckets. But in a lot of cases, we probably do. We want to make sure that any sort of cost that's going to be on that invoice, we have that cost and the corresponding attachment that goes with it. And then the last section might look a little strange at first, but this is now like which conditions, what are the parameters within the document type do I want to pull? What's the system looking for? In this case here, it's looking for registered pay request headers and the approval invoice code, or excuse me, in the invoice code. And so it's basically going to match the invoice with the transaction, with the attachment, and pull all of that information in for me automatically. And so to kind of see it all in action, let's go down to our project. go down to my budget and cost management, request for payment. I'm going to create a new RFP. Let's get diamond contracted in here. Grab our concrete. Call that 005. Give it a name. And let's just say 1200, 120. Oops, what am I doing there? You know, we'll ignore that one. We go 220. Good. And let's call this one 15,000. Excellent. So again, for those that are maybe wondering where I am, this is the field or project management request for payment, and this is sometimes accessed by the actual collaborators themselves or a PM or project engineer, project assistant acting on behalf of the subcontractor, right? You're entering a request for payment. We'll jump into this attachment tab section here. I'm gonna go ahead and upload the invoice from the sub. There's my request for payment. Make sure that looks good. We'll upload it. Select which PM folder is this going to. So PM folders would appear underneath document management. And I'm going to go ahead, click proceed. Excellent. Now real quick, just to make sure I haven't missed anything, is I want to always make sure that my imaging control, so underneath enterprise content management, imaging setup, imaging control, there's a flag over here to the far right that says copy PM RFP to imaging. I need to have this selected for this to work because it's going to take that attachment, put it into our image managed solution. That's where, again, all the images and attachments are stored, so that when I do the big search and say pull on the attachments, that attachment will be in the appropriate bucket and the system will be able to pull it in for me. If this is turned off, it's going to cause some issues for you. And so that's checked for us. We're going to go ahead and click submit. Excellent. That's just a quick example here. What I've been talking about, again, for those that might not have seen Image Manager before, this is where I have a corresponding document or attachment, an invoice of sorts, and the details on the right-hand side. And you saw all of these were populated for me because I entered it on the field PM side. And this SC Pay application is one of those folders that I'm telling the system to look inside when it's producing that billing backup for me. So I've got it in there. That looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and post. I'm gonna hit JC here. Okay, that looks good. I don't need to run that report. Let's jump back down to the enterprise world. And let's go into our billing side. Oops. Okay, good. And all I'm doing here is just to make sure that I've got that actual transaction on the draw. Okay, that's fine. I'm going to recalc my billings, include the new transactions, get rid of that. Okay, excellent. Make sure everything got added appropriately. There's no bill codes that are outstanding. Double check my cost transaction, just because sometimes when you're working fast, you miss some stuff. Okay, that looks good. And there it is there. So this is the one, this is the one I was looking for, right? That's my invoice amount, right? The 1,200 in this case, or at least one of them. This should be, yeah, that looks right. Okay. And now I'm ready to produce my backup. Just get rid of that. And now I'm going to go ahead and say JB contract. Remember that name I was using. There we go. That looks good. Let's call this billing draw 1, contract 1940. Draw number revision is 0. And I want to make sure that I have copied the images to my local drive, so that'll pull everything down for me and basically store all of these images in a zip file so I can present that to the customer, and then they'll be able to view everything for me. You know, I might want to have like show warning, and maybe I want to have include the link to all revisions and addendums as well, right? So basically, if there are revisions to the billing and there's attachments that should go along with those revisions, I want to see those. And then we'll go ahead and click print. We'll see this little pop-up here that's going to do its thing, basically scour the system for all of the related images associated to the cost transactions that have been included in my bill based off my setup. And now I'm going to have a nice clean report with those image backups. So what it's going to do for me, there we go. Excellent. It produces 2 zip files here. The second, where you see usually like part 2, that's really just for the logs, and we're going to ignore that for now. And we'll go ahead and open up part 1. That's the one I'm interested in. Beautiful. Here are now my invoices and the actual PDF itself. Now, because I'm sending this to somebody, I want to make sure, oops, I have this saved in the right folder. Dun, dun, dun. There we go. There we go. Excellent. Jump in here. And it should be the one I created today. There we go. And so this represents the billing backup. The images, of course, have been separated. And if you're doing this on a large job, there might be several tens of images. And so now what you're sending to the customer is probably this combination, this folder here. Oops. There we go. Right, this folder here, sorry. And so it's now just one complete package. So when they produce this, and you probably will send the G702 and 3 with them as well. And now we can see all of those transactions that we've added, right? Here's one of the ones in question, right? Remember invoice number 005. There's my image link. I can go ahead and click on the image link, see the invoice, and then go back to the, see the invoice from the sub in this case, and then go back and review the rest of the pay application to the owner. And now I showed us doing this from the PM request for payment screen, but this could be achieved from lots of different places where you have cost transactions with associated attachments like Image Manager, for instance, and of course the field side and some of the other transaction screens you would use like in payroll and things like that. So Sharon, that wraps up the demo portion. And so now we're ready to open things up for the interactive Q&A portion.
Great, thank you, Chet. It was a lot of information, and I think we've had some really good questions that have come in as well. I'm going to go ahead and get started off with a couple of questions that have come in from Mark Chernoff. He's asking, why does your mapping not include the lowest level job? If you have sub jobs, you can no longer map to the truest lowest level.
Yeah, great point, Mark. A lot of the times people will, you're absolutely right. So what Mark is asking is, why in my mapping code didn't include the lowest level job? And it really just depends on the customer. I'm sorry, by customer, I mean our CMiC customers. So it really depends on your setup in terms of if you use sub jobs or not. And let me just take us there real quick. So what Mark is saying here is, why didn't I include the lowest level job? And frankly, just for simplicity's sake, I know my job doesn't have any sub jobs. It's not something I ever use. Again, putting myself in kind of a one of a CMiC client's hats. If you never use sub jobs, but that's a great point. It is good practice to basically have that lowest level job. Because if you use sub jobs, then it's going to cause some issues for you. So let's see what I got here. Oops. Oops, so of course it's lowest level job, there it is. There, and I'd probably want this to be source, not probably, I'd want this to be source 1, absolutely. And that avoids any sort of issues that you would get, like a one-to-one mapping or having cost codes. The error message you saw where it said you have cost code categories not mapped to bill codes, I might run into that issue if I didn't have the lowest level job. Right? Because again, I need that the lowest level job cost code category to record those transactions. and then of course produce those bill codes for me. So great question, Mark.
And his second question was, what does the create billing button do in comparison to the generate button?
Let me just bring that guy up here. So the create billing is basically, it's very similar to recalc billings, and not something that you would often have to use once you've already started the billing process. The create billing is often used like for, this is your first time, or maybe you're doing like a revision, or maybe you deleted the draw and you need to bring in all of these details. The generate is really for the report. Generate is more used all the time, because generate is once I've done something, I've changed something, I need to click generate, and that basically tells the system, hey, go and collect all the necessary data, do any report calculations that might be associated with the invoice format that don't happen on the screen, like taxes, for instance. In some tax scenarios, you don't see the actual tax amount, but you see it on the report. And so what generate would do is it would create those, or excuse me, it would generate those calculations for me and effectively creates the report. And that's why you notice when I click print the one time, notice here like regenerate or print existing invoice. So I have the option to effectively do both. Or excuse me, I'm effectively kind of skipping generate and just having the printing option take care of that for me.
Great, thank you. The next question is from Greg Castano. Can unit price jobs be billed using CMiC?
Yep, absolutely. Great question. And hey, Greg, thanks for joining. So when you're using unit price jobs, you primarily, I shouldn't say primarily, I would say it's our recommendation, and I'm making sure I choose my words carefully here, but you need to use the prepare billing screen, which, excuse me, prepare billing detail. That might be called just prepare billing on your screen, and this prepare billing summary one might be called GC prepare billing. The program name is JB Bill, and the program name for prepare billing summary is JB Bill 2. And so you need to use this module for any sort of like unit billing because of the way that the columns you have available to you and the overrides that you need to do. You could try and scrape your way through doing unit billing on the prepare billing summary, but if it'll cause a lot of problems and headaches, and effectively just isn't really a good solution to do that. So yeah, absolutely use the prepared billing detail. If I misunderstood your question, Greg, feel free to just shoot me an email, and we can talk about that a little bit more.
Thank you, Chet. The next question is from Tim Ashman. Can you use WBS on the Group 1 through Group 5 mappings? Can you use WBS on the Group 1 through Group 5 mappings?
I'm not 100% sure if you can do that. I think it'll cause some issues. Let me just double check real quick. Let's see what I got here. Oh yeah, I can. It looks like I can. It'd be something, frankly, it's not something I've come across too often when it comes to the group summaries. I'm sure there's customers that are doing it. It gives me the options here. It's just not something I've used all the time. So that'll be a good takeaway for us to just to double check it doesn't cause any problems down the line when using WBS.
Perfect. And then Greg again is asking, does PCI detail billing also download images? PCI detail billing, does it also download images?
It can download images if your setup is done correctly, meaning the big thing is where does that image go when it's attached to the PCI. So if I have an image folder set up for PCIs, and then that attachment goes into the image folder, and my image search includes PCIs, then yes. Now, what might be more effective though is on the SCO. the subcontract change order. Because remember, when you post the PCI, it creates your subcontract change order for you, and the subcontract change order is what we see on the request for payment. And so you could effectively get to the same end result, but by just using the subcontract change order, which you certainly can have the billing backup for. Because PCI isn't necessarily cost, it's really just obviously a change order, just moving in the budget. But yeah, you would have to do some heavy lifting on your part to get the attachment and image folder set up, and then your image search would have to basically include to look for PCIs, and that's something our integration and our ECM team could certainly help us with.
And then do the images compile in the same order that they are usually listed in the invoice? This is a question by Justin Hill.
Sure. How do I see it? I think I got rid of my questions. Oh, there we go. Sorry. There we go.
Do the images compile in the same order that they are listed on the invoice?
Are they compiled in the same way at the invoice? I don't, well, the short answer would be it could, but chances are they won't, because the way in which you've decided to display the transactions on the AIA versus how it's showing up on the billing backup, right? Because on the billing backup, it's just going to list them in a particular order. Let's pull that up there, for example, so I don't have to work from memory. There we go. So in this case here, I have things listed by cost code, right? It's organizing them. Make sure I got that right. Yep. By cost code, or I have it by vendor. And then from there, it's going into the cost code. Whereas on your AIA style, it won't follow this same order because you have a lot of different options with group codes. What you may want to look into is having some sort of custom report built. And that's what a lot of folks will do when wanting to make the change order billing process a little bit more effective, and they'll maybe a little bit more specific to their customer. They'll have specific reports customized. So the short answer would be it certainly could, but chances are it won't because of the way that you're setting up and producing the AIA.
Thank you, Chad. Greg just has a quick clarifying question as well. He heard you say that once you set up WBS on your system, you cannot undo or go back to not having WBS. Is this correct?
So I'm not sure if I don't think I said that. Maybe if I did, it was kind of maybe just a slip. I think you might just be referring to, you just kind of heard it in general. It's like a lot of things in CMiC. If you've set up WBS at the company level, then yeah, most of your cost transactions are now going to have WBS codes available for those different transaction screens. And if you've posted transactions against it, well, then you effectively have to use it going forward. However, in I believe 13.2 or 14.1, patch 13.2 or 14.1 for enterprise clients, we've made WBS by job. So now you can have WBS codes and values unique by job. Whereas, Greg, there is a lot of merit to what you said, because if I'm setting up PCI 2 at the company level and I go and post a PCI, well, I can't turn the WBS off now because it's effectively used it on one job and the control comes at the company level. So you could put yourself in situations where now you are using WBS. However, we've since changed that, and you can have a lot more flexibility. You can basically, you'll see WBS codes in just about every transaction screen now. Like for a long time, we didn't have it in subcontracts as an example. Well, we sort of did, but it was always used for, so I'm just showing it real quick.
Sure.
I'm just dancing with the GoToMeeting thing. All right, so now I have these WBS values and things like the subcontract screen, the PCI screen, the SEO screen, RFP screen, I think. And well, yeah, it'll flow through from the subcontract. And so now you have a lot more flexibility. And if there are scenarios where you've, for whatever reason, kind of put yourself in some sort of weird loop, remember, we've also added these fields now to field security, so you can hide a lot of these WBS values now. I think we can, yeah, we're good to go to the next one.
Okay. Well, I'm going to skip over a few people and take somebody new. So Yvonne is asking if we need to delete a contract and start over again, what's the best way to do this?
Oh, easy. Oh, nice low-hanging fruit one for me. Okay, awesome, Yvonne. Thank you. I'm just kidding. The best way to, if you need to start all over again, it depends how far along you are. Meaning, if you have posted transactions, that's usually the crux to any of your problems. Meaning, as soon as you have like a posted transactions, like you've posted the draw, which creates an AR invoice, and then you have a receipt against it, you've got to work backwards and you've got to void all of those transactions, right? The system isn't going to let me delete a contract where I have basically AR invoices associated to that. We would call that a child record. And anytime there's those child records, you can't delete it. Let's say you haven't got that far, or in any case, you would void all of the transactions, and then when you want to back out, you just delete. In fact, let me see, I got one here we can delete. And so I would just come to the screen, just give it a good old delete. And it's going to validate for me and say, oh, you can't delete this, you have child records. In this case, I don't, right? So I just delete it, no problem. And then what I probably want to do, it depends on kind of where you are. Meaning if you added new cost codes and categories, obviously, if you've added those, then just do it from the enter budget or bid item screen. If you divide or have a division of duties, so you have PMs doing the budget and you have financial folks or project engineers doing the contract, they may only live in the screen. So just go ahead and click create contract details. Oops, I didn't have anything populated there. So either create contract details, probably your easiest bet, or I think the enter budget is probably the easiest bet there because it'll just do everything for you all over again.
Perfect. Thank you, Chad. We just have time for maybe two more questions and then we'll wrap it up here. We
Sure.
have 2 minutes remaining to end the session. So one quick question, maybe this is just a clarifying question as well by Tim Ashman. He asked the last time he checked, the end user cannot create album types in R12. Has this now changed? Because CMiC had to do this in the past for them. Creating album types in R12.
Now I know what he's saying, and you should be able to create your own. Now, because I work both with enterprise and cloud clients, and sometimes functionality that was delivered to the enterprise side hasn't made its way down to the cloud side. So I don't want to get this one wrong, and that's a pretty important question. So certainly, if we could mark that as a priority item to follow up on, you should be able to create your own albums.
Okay.
The program's called album type maintenance.
Got it. And then we have a detailed question from Bill Weldon. Do you have to manually set up an album every time you do a draw specific to that draw? Or once you
No.
set up the master album, the system auto-generates a new album for each draw?
Sort of the latter, and maybe I misled people there. Think of the album as more of the criteria for finding invoices. And so once you've done it once you've created an album once, you probably aren't going to be doing it again unless you have different types of, think of it more of like I have an album per backup report. It's probably a better way to think about it, because if I'm kind of all my jobs are the same, right? It's RFP, flowing that through, a couple miscellaneous invoices, some payroll transactions or payroll timesheets, one album, you're good to go. If you have some different jobs or different customer requirements and they want to see different backups on that report, then yeah, you'd have a different album. But once you've done it once, you won't have to create a new album each time. And so every time I do a billing backup, I always just use the same album. It has the selection criteria, search criteria defined, and that pulls everything in for me automatically. It's really album is equal to report, which is equal to selection criteria.
Perfect. Okay. And then regarding job billing backup, can PDF file addendums to backup files be incorporated under one PDF file for that vendor? Because Rose is saying that they have seen file addendums come over as separate documents within the job billing album packets.
I think that might be that'd be one I'd have to see to
Okay.
I think fully understand. But what I think is happening is if you're talking about, well, that's also why I had that flag to include the addendums. And your revision, you're probably talking about the billing revisions that you've made to them. And so if you're getting two separate line items for the vendor, one for the kind of original draw and then one for the vendor, we could look at having the search roll up and basically have them just kind of under one. I'd have to think about that a little bit more because I'm not sure you'd want that, because then how would you tell the difference between the first draw or the original draw and the revision draw?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that one I need to think about a little bit more.
Okay. And then I think we're already past the hour, so there are a few questions that are there, but we're gonna just park them and we're gonna see if we can answer them later. Actually, Rose just responded back as a follow-up to her question. She said, example, we have supplier waivers that export into imaging separately from a SC pay request. So when it drops into our imaging, it comes over as an addendum. This is an example of files that we would like to see under one PDF and not as separate files.
Yeah, I think in this example, the reason is because the supplier waivers are going into, from if I'm reading this right, they're going into a separate album. And within imaging, you can associate, like within Image Manager, for instance, with the fly sheet, you can associate multiple attachments to the actual request for payment and have those revisions. And so if that's done under one vendor or /one RFP, then it would just come in as one PDF with all of those addendums and revisions. So we may need to look at the way you're setting up your image folder and the image search on the billing backup.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Chet, for getting us through this session today. I know there was a lot of information that was covered for everyone here on this call. We thank you for attending, and we will send you the recording link of this session just shortly in a few days' time once we have kind of packaged it together. And if you have any additional questions that you would like to ask Chet one-on-one, please feel free to reach out to him on email as well. But we really thank you for your time and attending the session. We're going to be having our Connect conference in the next couple of months in November in Las Vegas. So you're going to be able to go through a lot of content at that time. And then the next one of these series will be then hosted in person, hopefully in February of next year. So again, thank you for your time, and we hope you have a good rest of the day wherever you are. Take care.
See you, everybody.